Okay, welcome back. It's been a good summer. Last spring we were traveling to biblical sites in Palestine and Israel, and biblical sites in Greece. And now we're going to travel to biblical sites in the last of the biblical lands, which is Turkey. Perhaps the least known and least appreciated of the biblical lands. But some people have done a little bit of math. Tutku Travel, based in Turkey, has calculated that the Apostle Paul, during his missionary life, spent 7% of his time in Israel, 14% of his time in Greece, and 60% of his time in what we today call Turkey. Would have been called Asia in Paul's day, known by the archaeologists as Anatolia, but you think of it as Turkey. So very, very important, kind of the power center of Christianity. All 7 of the early ecumenical councils were in what we call Turkey. Absolute power center of Christianity from the time of Paul down to about the 700 AD when Islam arrived. So we're going to pull up some slides for you, and we are going to be off to Turkey. So, okay. So, Paul and, actually Barnabas and Saul were sent out by Antioch on the first missionary journey, Acts chapter 13, and they traveled across Cyprus, Barnabas' home territory, then up to South Central Asia Minor, which was kind of Paul's home territory. He's from Tarsus. And then they came back to Antioch. And then a little bit later, around Acts chapter 15 and 16, Paul and Silas, sent out from Antioch, went overland, revisited these churches. At that time, Paul wanted to go down into Asia, Western Asia, to Asia Minor, we would say, to Ephesus. The Lord said no. He wanted to go to Bithynia. The Lord said no. So they wound up at Troas, and the Lord said, gave them a vision, come over to Macedonia and help us. And so where we were traveling last spring, the wonderful and interesting experiences of Paul in Greece, of Philippi, Thessalonica, Athens, and Corinth. And then on what we call the third missionary journey, Paul settled in Ephesus for a pretty long chunk of time, probably his longest time. And during Paul's time in Ephesus, the word of the Lord was heard all through this area, particularly in Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. And then later, in the mid-60s, late 60s, the Apostle John moved to Ephesus. We'll talk more about him next week. So this is kind of the setting that we're going to be here. Ephesus, one of the great, great cities of the ancient world, right across the Aegean from Corinth. Both of those about 200,000 in Paul's day, and both tremendous commercial and centers and just important political centers in the Aegean world. So, okay, so we are in ancient Ephesus. It was fortunately for us abandoned in antiquity and now being excavated, which means that it's all available to us. The modern city is not on top of the ancient city, so it's being excavated very extensively. This is the Bouleuterion, where this Ephesus City Council would have met in Paul's day and in John's day also, of course. The best seats for the council members, and then some more up here for the residents who were visiting the city council meeting for the day. Very near to the council room was, very near to the council chamber was the city clerk's office. It was his duty to do all his administrative work here and to keep the sacred fire going. And then these 2 pillars, we'll give you a little closer, engraved, there's your fire, sacred fire right there, and the famous statues of Artemis were found here in his office. Engraved on these pillars, you can just see the engraving. Now, these are very strategic. These say things like, Herman is in charge of keeping the streets clean. Sam is in charge of keeping the clean water flowing, and somebody else is in charge of keeping wild dogs off the streets. So if you have any complaints for the city administrators, you just go up, you find out who's in charge of that, and you go after them. It's a very efficient way to do your city government. I was quite intrigued by that. So that city clerk's office is up here. This is in the upper part of the city. In a few moments, we're going to walk down the long street to the library, and around the corner with the Agora and the Great Theater, the lower part of the city. Once you understand the geography, you can realize why later, when there's that tremendous riot in the theater, the city over here, the city clerk could not even hear it for 2 hours until someone ran from the theater down the side street, up this long street, and gave him the news. So the geography helps to explain what you read in Acts chapter 19. As we walk down this long street, we'll walk past the terrace houses and, like I say, to the library, over to the Agora. But please notice also the harbor. In Paul's day and in John's day, this would have been all water. There's a wonderful river coming down. So Ephesus, even though inland a little bit from the Aegean, was a harbor city. When the harbor silted shut due to deforestation upriver, bad ecological practices, the harbor was silted shut, and this was what contributed to this becoming abandoned and so becoming very available to us. As you walk down, all of these statues or statue bases would have had statues of benefactors and donors, people who had made contributions to the newest aquatic center or the newest skating rink or something, and then been honored by statues. Most of them, of course, are missing because over the years, other wealthy people in the countryside just came and stole them to decorate their gardens with. Okay, we're literally walking where Paul walked. Paul would have walked here about 54, 55 AD, and then the Apostle John, after Peter and Paul were both gone, John moved here about 67, 68 AD, and actually lived a couple of decades here in Ephesus. And here in Ephesus, he wrote what we call the Gospel of John, the Epistles of John, and so forth. Nike with her palm branch and olive wreath. The stadium, the ancient stadium for Ephesus, was about a mile outside of town. She was at the stadium over the entryway. You can visualize how that would have worked. But they kindly moved her into the city here for us to appreciate. And you can see her little swoosh right there. We'll say more about that when we talk about John in Ephesus. As we walk down that long road, we start to pass the shops that are on the hillside, and just the beginning of the terrace houses where the prosperous merchants would have lived. And now you can get a sense of the frescoes, the mosaics, very, very lovely homes. And the interesting thing is, when you read Acts chapter 19, at the time of the riot in the theater, it says that the leading citizens of Ephesus, the people who were probably not Christ followers yet, but they were friends of Paul, they respected Paul, they were listening to Paul, and they were telling him, don't go into the theater. These are the houses that those people would have lived in. And so this is very likely a place where Paul would have visited as he was meeting with the more educated and philosophical people of the city, telling them about Jesus the Messiah. It's really quite a feeling to be here. When they first started excavating those, they assumed that all the important stuff would be in the museum. They didn't think they would leave any of it in situ. So this is some more of the stuff that was early on dug up in those terrace houses and moved into the museum. This is Socrates, the Greek philosopher, and that is his name right there. So even though it's sometime after Socrates, he's still highly honored in Ephesus. Jump to the modern world for a moment. This actually happens to be a home nearby of a modern Christian couple who has opened their home for Christian meetings and fellowship in contemporary Turkey. And I include this because this gives you a sense of what things would have looked like in the days of Aquila and Priscilla and Lydia and Nympha in Colossae and Laodicea. These people who had a little bit more resources, had a little bit larger home with a central courtyard. This is where the early Christians would have met. And it was nice to be here a few years ago and see that same hospitality from the dear couple that owned this contemporary home here in Selçuk, which is just over the hill from Ephesus. Okay, back to ancient Ephesus. Everybody wanted a piece of ancient Ephesus, and so different emperors and wealthy people would sponsor buildings and monuments and fountains, and just a really fine and prosperous area. A lot of great artwork, and then on down that street to the library of Celsus, not there in Paul's day, built about a generation after the time of Paul by one of the wealthy citizens in honor of his father, Celsus, with statues in each niche, with little inscriptions, and then a lot of papyrus scrolls in a two-story library, carefully designed with double walls to handle the moisture so that the papyrus scrolls would not get overly moist. The wisdom of Celsus, Sophia Celsu. Okay, so that was libraries right there. This was here in Paul's day. This is the entrance into the agora, or marketplace, and a very, very beautiful monumental entrance, which was quite new, actually, in Paul's day. We're going to take you up there for just a moment. Inscription, the great Emperor Caesar, the son of the Divine One, Augustus, Pontifex Maximus, which means the great bridge between God and humanity, and then some of the years of his rule, and then his wife Livia, and Augustus, and sponsored by a man named Masius and Mithridates, whose name is over here. So every time you walked into the marketplace, you were confronted with this kind of propaganda that Caesar was, divine and the son of the divine Julius and so forth, and the great bridge between God and humanity. So this is the background against which Paul comes and says, I need to tell you about a Jewish carpenter from Nazareth who was crucified and is indeed the risen Lord. And you can see where that just kind of made people's heads spin for a while. Okay. Into the agora. This is the great agora or marketplace. And down the marble road here will be the great theater, which we'll enter into in a few minutes. But first of all, there's that library, there's that great entrance, a great agora here. And Demetrius the silversmith, who created all the turmoil in Acts chapter 19, would have had a shop somewhere. One of these shops is his, and he created that great turmoil, and it wasn't far from the agora, right across the street into the great theater, which is right behind us. And here is the road down to the harbor. Actually, this is the road down to the harbor. This is a gymnasium. This is the road down to the harbor in Paul's day. But into the theater we go. Give you a sense of the scale here, having a few people in it. Seats about, it's a good place to stop and read about Paul's ministry in Ephesus. Seats about 24,000 people, a pretty good sized theater. And Paul was ministering here for a substantial length of time, and during Paul's ministry here, all of Asia heard the word of the Lord. So, okay. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a chance to sometime read back through Acts chapter 19 about Paul's ministry in Ephesus and gain some new insights. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you hopefully next week for John's ministry in Ephesus. Okay.